I'll begin this morning, though, with the crisis in Ukraine and Europe teetering on the brink of war.
The United States is now weighing whether to deploy troops to the region as Russia adds even more forces to its border with Ukraine. Overnight, the State Department ordered family members of U.S. embassy employees to leave Kiev. They're also warning American citizens in Ukraine who are not working for the U.S. that if war does break out, they should not expect to be evacuated by the government. State Department officials warned late last night that Vladimir Putin could make a decision to invade at any time. They just don't know when.
All of this comes after a bombshell accusation from the UK over the weekend, claiming the Kremlin is trying to start a coup in Ukraine. The goal of the alleged plot to throw out Ukraine's democratically elected president and replace him with a Moscow-friendly one. America's top diplomat is now issuing a stern warning should any Russian troops cross the border.
If a single additional Russian force goes into Ukraine in an aggressive way, as I said, that would trigger a swift, a severe, and a united response from us and from Europe.
NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is on the ground in Kiev, Ukraine, and NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman is following the White House response from Washington, D.C. Good morning to both of you. And Matt, I'll start with you on the ground. What is the current situation at the border and across Ukraine as this situation grows more tense?
Yeah, I mean, guys, I've been walking around Kiev a bit. The fact of the matter is this does not feel palpably like a country that's girding for war, but that is, of course, exactly what happens. Most of the drumbeats that we're hearing are coming from outside of Ukraine. Just like a lot of the diplomacy, Ukrainians kind of feel like they've been left out so far because most of this is happening at the level of the Russians and the Americans. But now, as you guys were mentioning, there's a lot of talk of U.S. troops, U.S. resources going toward Eastern Europe. And just now, we just heard that NATO will be deploying extra forces. Some European countries will be deploying extra forces to Eastern Europe, to especially that Baltic region, Estonia, Lithuania, around there north of here. Those are NATO member countries. And it sounds as though France, Spain, Denmark, they're going to be sending what are mostly air and naval resources. That's the big thing that is lacking here amongst the Ukrainian military. They don't have the kind of air power and the kind of sea power that would be necessary in order to deflect against a Russian invasion. And that is what the NATO forces are going to be bringing to bear north of here, north of Belarus. Whether or not that's going to stop Vladimir Putin from whatever it is he's planning on doing, because we still don't know, that's yet to be seen. Guys?
Josh, let's talk about the American response. President Biden met with his national security team over the weekend. They briefed him about a few options. So what are the options the White House is considering?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. President Biden huddling over the weekend at Camp David with his team. He was briefed by a virtual secure video conference by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on steps the U.S. could take to really shore up its military defenses in the region against Russia ahead of an invasion, really to try to signpost to Russia what the potential military consequences could be. Officials telling our colleague Courtney Kuby that among those options could include flying bombers over the region, having military ships visiting the Black Sea, as well as sending not only more equipment, but also more U.S. troops to Poland, to Romania, potentially to other countries in Europe. And in fact, along those lines, we also know that the U.S. and NATO are beginning a major military exercise starting today based out of the Mediterranean Sea, all intended to really put on vivid display the capabilities that both the U.S. and its NATO allies have in the region. And I think we have to point out this is quite a shift in tone from the Biden administration, which just about a week ago was really focused on the flip side of this coin, on the let's make an off-ramp of diplomacy for the Russians. Let's try to focus on where we can still potentially create diplomatic opportunities to resolve this without a war or a Russian incursion. Now, of course, the administration over the weekend, including those comments from Secretary Blinken, still leaving open the door to diplomacy. But I think if you take a step back, it is very clear that the U.S. is shifting into more of a posture of trying to make very clear the potential military consequences for the Russians if they go ahead and launch this invasion that is so feared across the West right now.
Now, Matt, as we mentioned, British officials accused the Kremlin over the weekend of seeking to install a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine First, what kind of evidence did the UK uncover there? Do we have any details on that? And then also, what's been the reaction in both Kiev and Moscow about such an accusation?
Yeah, we don't have much evidence. Moscow, that's the reason why Moscow kind of laughed this off. And even Ukrainian lawmakers and prominent politicians laughed it off, too, because, like I said, there wasn't that evidence. A lot of the people, there were 5 men who were identified in that report, former Ukrainian politicians. A bunch of them are now living in exile in Moscow. So they're not exactly available and wouldn't be available probably unless there was a major Russian incursion. So the really worries here aren't necessarily about this coup plot that the British have unveiled and that U.S. officials seem to be standing behind that intelligence. The real worry here is about an actual land invasion from Russia, from Russian assets in Belarus, north of where I am now. So there isn't a whole lot of credulity when it comes to those intelligence reports, and a lot of headlines and a lot of commentators have said that they're kind of confused.
Josh, very quickly, how are the White House and State Department responding to this accusation that Russia wants to install a puppet regime?
Well, the White House National Security Council says that kind of plotting is deeply concerning. But, you know, this is really interesting, Joe. We can now report, according to U.S. officials, that this intelligence that the Brits put out actually originated with the United States and was shared with the United Kingdom, which then made it public. So clearly, the U.S. has a very specific hand in this intelligence. All of this part of the effort by the U.S. and its allies in Western Europe to try to expose what they see as elements of the Russian playbook that's been used in the past in Georgia during the incursion in 2014, to try to put that out in the public so that if Russia tries anything to try to muddy the waters, people will know about it and be able to call it out in real time, Joe.
Matt and Josh, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Thank you both so much. And joining us now to talk more about this is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. He's also the vice president of Russia Europe at the United States Institute of Peace. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time. And first, I just want to get your reaction to this news overnight, this order by the State Department calling on the families of embassy personnel to leave Ukraine. I'm wondering, do you think that's the right call? And I mean that in two ways, for the safety of the families, but also the message that it sends. And are you concerned that this could be the start of a broader winding down of staff within Ukraine?
Savannah, this is a prudent step. This has been considered for several months. This is what the State Department does. It takes care of its people. It's been thinking about how to respond to this and the continued threats by the Russians to invade or to take other very active steps against Ukraine is troubling and is something that the United States and the State Department have to take very seriously. So a step that will still allow the embassy to do its job. It will continue to provide the input and the intelligence and the ideas back to Washington and support the government of Ukraine. So it will be able to do its job, but it's taken prudent steps.
I want to ask you about some things that you've written since Friday's meetings between Secretary Blinken and his Russian counterpart. This article for the United States Institute of Peace saying that diplomacy is one of the hopes for preventing a wider Russian invasion. Of course, we've heard a lot about that, this off-ramp of diplomacy. But in recent weeks, we've had several high and low-level meetings between U.S. and Russian officials, all of which all parties seem to even go into expecting no breakthrough. And then it seems that is, in fact, the case on the other side of them. So not much concrete progress. How would you like to see diplomacy work here? What does that path look like?
That path looks like President Putin making the decision to take it. It's there. It's offered. President Biden, Secretary Blinken has made it very clear that there are areas that we can negotiate, that we can discuss. The concern on the Russian side about missiles being in Ukraine, or the concern on the Russian side about heavy bombers close to their borders. We have concerns, too. We have concerns about their missiles that threaten Europe. So there's obviously stuff to talk about. There are negotiations to be had. At the same time, we have to be prepared that for President Putin to make a bad decision to kill a lot of Ukrainians, military and civilian, to kill a lot of Russian soldiers in order to accomplish what he's trying to accomplish. It's his decision, but he can go the negotiation route. That's there.
And also, I want to ask you about that reporting that we just heard from our own Josh Letterman just moments ago that says that this, what has been being cited as this UK accusation, actually did originate with intelligence from the U.S. about this potential puppet regime being installed. What's your reaction hearing that? If that is this U.S. intelligence, if we do believe that's a possibility here in terms of how diplomacy is the path ahead?
Savannah, the U.S. intelligence services and the British intelligence services and other intelligence services work very closely. This is something that we do have to worry about. This is something that the Russians do well. They put people, agents, special forces into Ukraine. They cultivate opposition leaders that they might be able to use if they do invade and if they do try to take over the government. So this is credible. This is concerned. The Russians have done this before.
Former Ambassador William Taylor, we so appreciate your expertise on a morning like this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Savannah.
Americans in some parts of the country now see a glimmer of hope in the fight against COVID. Cases and hospitalizations are dropping in several northeastern states, suggesting Omicron may be on the decline in the U.S. But experts warn we're not out of the woods yet. States in the South and the West are still battling the variant as hospitalization rates continue to rise in those regions. And experts fear states with low vaccination rates may have an even harder time combating Omicron. All of it is sparking even more debates over vaccine mandates. Thousands of anti-vax protesters marched in Washington on Sunday, demanding an end to all vaccine mandates, including in the classroom and in the workplace. Let's bring in Dr. Anand Swaminathan for more. He's an assistant professor of emergency medicine at St. Joseph's Hospital. Doctor, good to have you with us on this Monday morning. So Dr. Fauci says he's cautiously optimistic about the COVID trend in the U.S. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Ultimately, they're all going to go in the same direction. There may be a bit more pain and suffering with hospitalizations in those areas of the country that have not been fully vaccinated or have not gotten boosters. But we do know, and these are the recent data that have come out from the CDC, that even with Omicron, boosting makes a major, major difference in protecting you from hospitalization and severe outcomes. So things are looking good. We don't want to get overconfident, but they all look like they're going in the right direction right now.
So, Doctor, do you agree with his assessment there of where we're going? And at what point could we be done with Omicron?
A lot of this takes a little bit of perspective and frame of reference. Dr. Fauci's optimism is coming out of a month ago when we didn't know what this Omicron surge would look like. We didn't know if it was going to mirror what we saw in South Africa. And the fact that we are seeing this rapid decline tells us that likely we're going to follow that same pattern. As long as we continue to do the right things, we have to remember that we have been doing certain of the correct maneuvers to help to knock cases down. I think, though, that we still need to understand where we are. We've got about 700,000 cases a day, over 2,000 deaths just yesterday. So we're not really in that good a place, but we are heading in the right direction. And now's the time for us to refocus. How do we get vaccine rates higher? What mandates or what are our maneuvers to get more mandates into place to get those vaccine rates higher? How do we make more testing available? We have to invest in surveillance and public health measures. And then, of course, we have to keep our focus on global vaccine equity, which is going to be vitally important to stop the next variant.
So with Omicron down in several northeastern states, what's your advice on how people in those areas should approach COVID right now? At what point can those places maybe start to lower some of their restrictions?
Again, this is a little bit premature because those restrictions are what have helped us to knock those cases down. And you still see high levels of cases. In New Jersey, where I live, we were at a peak of 31,000 cases a day. We're down considerably, but still higher than at any point during this pandemic. So we need to keep those restrictions in place. We need to understand that layering of those mitigation strategies are extremely helpful. And then, of course, expanding our use of the tools that are really helpful. If we want to see things like masks go away, if we want to have more public gatherings, then vaccine rates need to be higher. We need to practice all of those other measures in order to knock those restrictions away.
While we're talking about masks, we have a question from one of our viewers here. This is from Donnie Miller in Pennsylvania. Donnie asks, I'm in close contact with the public daily, and when I was wearing a surgical style mask, I replaced it daily. But now I have upgraded to KN95 and KF94 masks that are more costly and harder to find. How often should I be replacing my mask to help keep me safe? Do you have a quick answer for Donnie there?
Yeah, Donnie, first of all, great that you are using one of these higher quality masks. That's fantastic. We don't really have a great answer to this, but some things we do know. these masks can't get wet, not like cloth masks. So if it gets wet, you've probably lost the ability for that mask to protect you. You should get rid of it. If it's visibly soiled, that's also a good measure to throw it away. But I'll tell you that I'm using my mask and reusing it, and I think that that's safe as long as it looks clean. It hasn't gotten wet. You can keep using that mask.
All right, Dr. Swaminathan, as always, thank you so much. And if you, our viewers, have a question for one of our doctors, you can let us know. They are ready to answer them. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions, and you can also let us know if you want to stay anonymous. A series of new NBC polls paint a bleak picture for the direction of our country. 72% of respondents believe America is headed in the wrong direction. An overwhelming majority of Americans think the political polarization seen in recent years will continue and that the threat to American democracy is a real and serious one. NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray is here to help us break down these new polls. Mark, good morning to you. So let's start off with that figure we just showed. Over 2/3 of Americans, 72% polled, believe the country is heading in the wrong direction. How often do we see this number in this territory, and what does that tell us now heading into the midterms?
Yeah, Joe, relatively, this is a really high number for our poll. This is only, this is the second straight NBC News poll we've had more than 70% of Americans saying the country is headed in the wrong direction. And we are in an election year, and in past election years, in the 30-year history of our poll, we've only seen that where you've ended up having 70% wrong direction more at least twice in a row. And those took place in the election years of 1992, 2008, and 2016. And Joe, what did those three elections have in common? The party in power ended up losing control. And so this is a pretty grim, not only is the public in a grim mood, but this is a pretty grim poll for the Biden administration and Democrats who are trying to control of Congress.
Mark, let's take a look at some of the other questions which suggest Americans believe our democracy is being threatened and that political polarization between Republicans and Democrats is here to stay. So that polarization number, how much has that number you see there grown over the years? And what's your takeaway of these responses?
Yeah, Joe, that polarization number to me was the most surprising out of all, where when we last asked this question back in 2010, it was pretty much a mixed verdict on whether polarization will continue or whether America can come together during difficult times. And now all of a sudden you end up having 7 in 10 Americans who just say, you know, the polarization is only going to continue in this country. And so, you know, that to me really stood out. And then, Joe, when he talks about the 76% who believe that there is a real threat to democracy, that's shared by more than 7 in 10 Democrats, independents, as well as Republicans. But when we ask Democrats and Republicans, so what is the reason behind that threat to democracy? And Democrats ended up answering Donald Trump, and Republicans answered Democrats. And so there is not an agreement on what the real threat to democracy is between Democrats and Republicans.
Looking at those numbers, Mark, not too surprising. Americans don't seem too optimistic about the possibility of bridging divides seen in our society. Here's another number. Only 27% of Americans think that the country can come together. 70% say they can't. So is the idea of compromise and bipartisanship basically gone right now in America?
I don't know if it's gone, Joe, but that is certainly a grim statistic. And we've seen this country in its history come together, whether it was in World War II, during the Cold War, the Great Depression, even the Great Recession in this country, even though there were certainly some political differences between the Democrats and Republicans. But the way we ask this question, that given our political differences, when the going gets tough, will this country get together? And in 2010, the percentages were pretty mixed. 45% to 50%. And now all of a sudden you have an overwhelming majority who say that the polarization will only continue.
Maybe we can hope those 27% will be proven right at some point. Mark Murray, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
And turning now to the latest on Capitol Hill, where Arizona Senator Kirsten Sinema was censured over the weekend by the Democratic Party Executive Committee of her state. The move comes after Sinema voted against a filibuster rule change, effectively killing the Democrats' voting right bills in the Senate. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now with more on this. Hey, Ali, good morning. So first, just walk us through the Arizona Democratic Party decision here and what they've said about Sinema since that pro-filibuster vote.
Hey guys, good morning. You know, our sources in the room say this was a unanimous decision by the Arizona Democratic State Party to censure Senator Kirsten Sinema for what she did last week, effectively killing that voting rights push by not backing a rules change in the Senate that would have, in this targeted instance, allowed Democrats to move forward with just a simple majority vote to pass that package of voting rights reforms. The Arizona State Party, in a statement referencing those votes, saying that while they take no pleasure in the announcement, they have decided to censure her for her failure to do whatever it takes to ensure the health of our democracy. At another point in the statement, they talk about how a diverse coalition with room for policy disagreements is important for the party, but at the same time, on the matter of the filibuster and voting rights, they say, we have been crystal clear. And you got to remember, Arizona is a place that has seen election audits. That is where the Arizona State Party brought in the cyber ninjas to conduct that election audit. It's a state, obviously, that Joe Biden won in 2020 and the Democrats have been trying to make gains in for years, a state that's very much at the center of this debate on voting rights on the ground.
So, Allie, I mean, you say it's this unanimous vote in the room that obviously doesn't spell out a lot of confidence. What does this mean for Senator Sinema's future within the Democratic Party, within her state, for her reelection campaign in 2024?
Yeah, and one of those top election officials within the Arizona Democratic Party says it's unlikely or even impossible that they ultimately support her reelection bid in 2024. That's stunning, but that's not to say that they won't have other options, because there are people who are talked about, although they have not expressed outright interest or said that they are going to run. There are other people within that apparatus who say that they could challenge Sinema, among them a sitting Congressman Ruben Gallego, also of Arizona, of course, currently serving in the House, who has been very critical of Sinema, especially over the course of the last few days. A lot of eyes watching him as if he's someone who could hop in and primary her. Because to zoom out just briefly, other senators, including Senator Bernie Sanders, yesterday on Meet the Press said they should mount primary challenges to Sinema and Manchin. Mounting a primary challenge against Manchin from the left in West Virginia, very, very, very difficult. I've covered his re-elections in the past. His personality is what helps him get reelected. But for Senator Kirsten Sinema, someone who's in her first term, this could be a potential primary challenge that Democrats could see succeed.
And Allie, quickly before I let you go, the future of those bills that were impacted by this filibuster vote, is there any progress on passing slimmed down versions of those two voting right bills?
Yeah, those two bills as they were written and exist, no progress there. But in terms of a slimmed down motion on voting reform, we have seen a bipartisan group of senators come together talking about things like reforming the Electoral Count Act, which deals with how vice presidents certify election results, an 1887 rule in that vein. Senators coming together saying they could see progress on that, as well as something that speaks to voting officials being harassed, something we saw a lot in 2020 and something that the Senate could ultimately move on. But you got to be clear, Democrats have said this isn't enough to replace what they were previously trying to do last week.
All right, Ali Vitale, thank you so much.
Time on this Monday morning to get a check on your morning news now weather.
Yeah, today that includes a wildfire burning on the coast of Big Sur. Fire crews are making progress there. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Yeah, January, right? Tracking a wildfire. It doesn't happen that often in California, but we haven't had any rain in like the last month. We had a really great December. We had a lot of rain and snow, but for the last month, it's been extremely dry. We had strong winds this weekend with the Santa Ana winds. This was about a 1,500-acre blaze. This was considered the first big fire of this new year. And last year, we actually had a couple in January in California. There was about 1,000 people evacuated at one point. They've gotten the fire a little more under control now that the winds have died off. We don't have any reports of any structures that have burned either. There were about 1,000 residences that were threatened. So, wild stuff. It's still warm in the West Coast, but it's not windy, so that really helps the firefighters. So this week is going to be all about the cold and the snow, and then potentially a lot of snow by the end of the week. But we'll have more on that coming up. So first things first, this morning you're waking up Green Bay, Milwaukee, Chicago. A little bit of snow out there this morning when you head out the door. And if you're heading out the door in southern Michigan, including Detroit, Toledo, into Cleveland, that snow is on the way right at the peak of your morning rush hour. So 17 million people are under winter weather alerts. It's not a lot of snow. And we're midwinter now. We're used to driving in it in this region of the country, but doesn't mean it makes it easy for a Monday morning, especially especially driving near Buffalo, south to Erie, or off of Lake Michigan. So as far as the week ahead forecast goes, we're also watching some rain along the Gulf Coast. Kind of a quiet middle of the week, but bitterly cold air once again heading for the East Coast. And that could set the stage, guys, for a potential snowstorm come Saturday. It starts on Friday, maybe getting hammered in New England Saturday. More details on that as the week progresses. But another weekend storm. I refuse to work again.
All right, I'll sit in for you, Bill. I'll do the weather.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll switch. I'll do Friday for you, and you do me. Good.
Joe, I don't know. I
don't know if the bosses will like it, but we don't care.
Yeah, Joe, your quiz track record, though. I don't know.
I'm not very good at it. All right, thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.